Actually, it's slightly daunting in the sense because I have a lot to say. I can't say it all. Luckily, there are 4 fantastic speakers and I've seen their slides, and many of the things I wanted to say, they are saying later. So I think one of the pressures here is we all want to do so much. We all want to do it quickly. We want to do it today. And I think I felt that pressure preparing this talk. I kind of want to get it all out there, and I can't. But we have all day. We have plenty of time for questions at the end. And I hope for us this is the start of the conversation, really, not the end. So forgive me if I don't kind of touch on absolutely everything that we ideally would like to. Okay. So I'm talking here about starting as we mean to go on, and that's really because most of what I'm talking about today to start off the morning is really thinking about some of the basic building blocks of what well-being means and how that relates to mental health. And to me, starting as we mean to go on is about starting as early as we can in our families, in our communities, in our schools, and preparing the basic kind of building blocks for the rest of our lives. And I think what David's introduction highlighted so well is how essential it is that we deal with well-being and mental health at the earliest possible occasion, hence the title, Starting as we mean to go on. So, is it the happiest time of our lives? I don't know. Probably, if I've been in a room where we asked this question of everybody in the audience. I'm not going to do it now just because of the interest of time, but approximately 90% of the audience said it was not the happiest time of their life. So I'll leave it to you to decide if you're in the majority or the minority. But essentially, despite all of the kind of cliches, there's a lot of pressure on young people, both to be happy, but importantly, and more often now we hear to do well. That seems to be the main thing they hear. And at the time that all of these different pressures are on them to succeed, to be happy, to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, to settle down, to make friends, to be on social media, they're going through an enormous period of development and change, both in psychological and physical ways. And we see the physical development very clearly. Those of us who've got children will have seen our children grow when we see their school photographs every single year. We don't see the changes going on inside their brains though. And at the same time as all the physical changes are happening, their brains are developing and growing as well. And what we know now is that the important parts of the brain that deal with decision making, the things we call executive functions that control our behaviours and our emotions, carry on developing well into our mid-20s. So this is a process that children in schools are really just in the start of or in the middle of. And therefore, it's perhaps not surprising when you see this sort of a slide. It really essentially shows you when the major problems with mental health tend to begin. So these are obviously generalisations, but what you'll see along the bottom is the age from 0 to 30, and nearly every major mental health problem begins before the age of 30, and many of them start before children leave school. So for very early young children, we're talking about autistic spectrum disorders, ADHD. By about the age of 7, anxiety disorders become more apparent. And by the time children are in high school, depression and other more severe mental health problems come online. So a lot of the onset of these mental health problems occurs at this very critical age when children's brains are still very much in the development. So this is about growing your brain, and what you see is that the blue areas in the front tend to come online. They're developing all the way through until our mid-20s. And this is really important because what we also see, and this is work from a colleague in psychology, who's shown very clearly that, as you might expect really, when you offer young people a reward and you put them into a scanner, you see a very different response in their brains to rewards than you will with older people. Essentially, younger people are much more sensitive to rewards. They get much more excited about rewards, they're much more engaged by rewards, they're more captivated by rewards, and they find them more rewarding when they get them, which is really interesting because the sorts of things that are rewarding aren't always very positive. They can be lovely, happy things, but there's also lots of risky things that are very, very rewarding. So we see this as a time of kind of potential risk because of the types of stimuli that capture your attention when you're a teenager. And it's particularly important because of what I mentioned before, this development of executive functioning, the fact that children's brains, their reasoning, is still very much coming online. So at a time when you're captured by these very exciting stimuli, you haven't quite got the cognitive capacity to necessarily kind of manage your behaviour, to stand back and think about what you're doing, to consider all your alternatives, to think about the options you have in front of you. So it's very easy to make errors of judgment. So the brain's executive functions are really responsible for a whole range of different things. How to be busy, how to keep your focus, the amount of effort you put into things. We manage our emotions through using up the front of our brains. It works on our memory, how we hold on to and use our memories, and we use our executive functions to decide what actions to take. So this is a hugely important area of development. And what we found, and this is really my first slide where we're talking about the evidence, one of our PhD students who's here today, Jenny, has looked at children who've got low mood, very high symptoms of depression, and those who are healthy, so they have really very low symptoms. These are children taken from a routine high school in the Midlands, as it happens, a very deprived school. And what she finds here is a very striking difference between the healthy group and those with low mood. And what you can see is that in the orange bar and the green bar, this is verbal fluency and working memory, children who've got depression are significantly impaired in terms of the kinds of reasoning abilities that they can use. So these are children completely matched for IQ. There's no other difference other than their depression status. So one of the problems that depression has, in addition to the low mood and the effects it has on our feelings and our emotions, it interferes with how we make decisions. It really interferes with our concentration. It interferes with how good and how able children can be at school. There's a direct impact on children's ability to engage with and succeed at school. So this is a really salient and relevant issue, especially for children who really want to do well and for whom there's enormous pressure to do well. So in that slide there, really, I'm contrasting children who've got quite severe symptoms of depression with those who don't, as if these were two very different things, like they're just opposites. But we know really that's not actually how it works at all. Mental health and well-being are much more complicated than that. And what we see if we measure symptoms of mental health is that most people who are at this end, in the ones and the twos, are actually have very minimal symptoms. There's nothing wrong with most people most of the time. And a very much smaller number will get increasingly more and more severely distressed and disabled by their symptoms. So this is not a situation which everybody's got mental health problems, but what we do see is that people can move up and down here. Unlike the situation in the United States, this is a very similar looking graph. Just to illustrate how it works, most people don't earn a lot of money. Most people in America are probably not going to get any richer or poorer. They're going to stay in the same place. So you'll see here the vast majority of people are earning in the low dollars, with one or two Trump type people at the very top end earning all the money. So it's not a dissimilar, if I go backwards, it's not dissimilar to the situation here. The biggest difference here is that any of us can slide up and down that curve. So whilst we might be perfectly fine and functioning today, next year we may find ourselves in a slightly different position. It's very unlikely any of us will float from the middle range of income up to Donald Trump's levels, but this is one of the biggest differences. So maybe it's better to think about health and well-being as if they're slightly distinctive things. So here I'm going to focus on well-being. And well-being as distinct from both physical and mental health, but very much linked and associated with both. So I think the general view is that, that well-being, can you still hear me? Is that okay? That well-being is distinct from physical and mental health, but very strongly related to both. So that if we've got good physical health, we're more likely to have good well-being. If we have good mental health, we're also, more likely to have good well-being. But these are distinct and different things. So it is possible to have a severe and enduring and long-term physical health problem, but also to have reasonably good well-being. And that is also true if you have a long-term mental health condition. You can still function and have some elements of well-being. So we think about these as different things. With well-being, we're thinking about experiences such as joy and excitement, but also much more mundane things like contentment, having a sense of purpose and feeling satisfied. It's not all about having high, fantastic, wonderful feelings. Some of these neutral feelings are really very, very important too. Just the sense of being out in the world or walking around the park gives you a sense of well-being. Mental ill health, however, so with well-being here, we're trying to increase well-being and to develop well-being and to maximise well-being. And in a sense, I think, who better or where better to do this than in schools? When we think about mental ill health or physical ill health, we tend to think about distress. In mental health, it's worry, anxiety, sadness. And these are symptoms. We're aiming to reduce these. We're aiming to take them away, or we're aiming to minimise them. We want to remove the symptoms. And really our question today is, what is the role for schools here? So for me, it seems very clear. Schools are in an excellent position to promote well-being. The question about where they're positioned in terms of reducing distress, improving mental health, treating mental illness is a very different question. And I think something that's a pretty open thing that we may want to think about as the course of the day goes on. But these are very distinct activities, and I think it's very important to be clear that they differ. And we're talking about mental health, mental illness, well-being at a time when all the sorts of traditional boundaries are being broken and when schools are being asked to do increasingly more, and when the NHS is continually raising the boundary for accessing its services. So schools, teachers, school staff, parents end up not knowing where to go. The traditional places you could have gone into CAMS really seem very difficult to access. When I first started working in CAMS, we virtually took any referral that came our way. I don't remember turning people away. Now we know that that is not true. We know people wait inordinately long times for treatment, and many people don't even get past the first hurdle. So how can we improve well-being in schools? So I said I was really going to focus on well-being, and until last night I was going to talk about 4 pillars of well-being: sleep, diet, what we eat, activity, what we do, and purpose. And we were out for dinner with Mick Cooper, who's coming along later today, or may already be here, and he said, there he is at the back, he said, you forgot relationships. You're right, I did forget relationships, so thanks Mick, I've put relationships in the bottom. So this is why I had to change my slides, so they couldn't be the same ones as I presented yesterday. Relationships comes up, but really I want to just focus on those 4 pillars for today, because I think these are areas where they have a direct impact on well-being, and schools have a very clear way of helping children develop what I'd call healthy habits. So let's start with sleep. We all know about sleep in teenagers. We know that children's circadian rhythms change. We know their sleep patterns change. We also know that if you get a bunch of depressed teenagers, and this is a very large group of depressed teenagers, so they've all sought treatment, they've all had a diagnosis, and these are all the symptoms of depression that we assess. The most common problem, not low mood, it's sleep. Nearly all of the children in this sample who were depressed had big problems with sleep. I'm not just talking about the odd night, I'm talking about a chronic difficulty with sleep that pervades through their life and interferes with their functioning. But interestingly, that's a depressed group. We also know that sleep and feeling tired and fatigued is very important to children who aren't in the clinic. So this is another piece of research by Emily Green, another one of our PhD students, also here today. She's gone around asking children how they would describe themselves. And she does this very simply by giving them a set of statements that say, I am, and they have to complete the rest of the sentence, so they can be anything. So if you look at the negative words that they use to describe themselves, we've split these into children who've got no depression, moderate symptoms of depression, and high depression. So low, moderate, and high go across the board there. And what you'll see is that tired comes up as the most common negative adjective that children use to describe themselves, unless they're not depressed, but they hardly use any negative words at all. But being tired is a bit of a preoccupation with children today. So what do we do about sleep? We don't know if sleep is the cause of depression or whether being depressed makes you sleep worse. But there's increasing evidence suggesting that sleep difficulties actually are a precursor to the onset of other mental health problems. Even if they're not, sleep and functioning and getting on with life and doing okay at school, sleep seems to be a hugely important issue to tackle early, to establish good sleep routines, to get into good sleep habits, to value sleep. It's also really helpful because if you ask kids who has problems sleeping, nearly everybody's happy to say I do. It's not stigmatised. It's not like a mental health problem where somebody wouldn't tell you they were crying or they were upset or they got no pleasure. If you ask them if they have sleep problems, they're very likely to say they do, if they have. So that's sleep. So diet. Okay, what about diet? How is diet important? So we know that there's a relationship between food and mood in general. The research is not terrifically brilliant. We've looked at the relationship between diet and depression in teenagers, and another one of our PhD students recently written a paper about this. She did a systematic review of all the evidence there is linking diet to depression in teenagers, and found, as you might have expected, that yes, there is an association between the type of diet you eat and your well-being. If you eat a healthy mixed diet, and people define this in a number of different types of ways, but that picture kind of encapsulates what we mean, you're less likely to have depression or to experience symptoms of depression. There's not been tested in a causal relationship in a very large population of children. This is an association. So it's important, but not something we can conclude. But very interestingly, these studies go right across the world. So it's a cross-cultural phenomenon. We see it all over the world. Diet is associated with mood, depression, and functioning. So that's the reference to the paper she's recently written. So in an experimental study, she's also done something very, very interesting. We know that diet also can affect how you think. And there's a big line of research going on here at Reading about the effect of blueberries on people's concentration, attention, the ability to solve problems. And we know that if you give people a dose of blueberries, it does improve their ability to do those things. That's really interesting in children, in old people, in adults, and all sorts of people. What Sundis did was actually look at the effect of blueberries on mood in children and in adults, and she finds exactly the same thing, but this is the children's data. What you see here is positive affect and negative affect. So positive affect is feeling good, feeling joyful, feeling elated, feeling happy, feeling great. Negative affect is feeling miserable, fed up, and all the rest of it. And what you see there is the positive affect in children before and after they have this dose of blueberries. It's 2 hours afterwards, and 2 hours after they have the dose of blueberries, their positive affect goes up. It's very striking and really, really surprising, and we did not really expect to see this. So we're doing more on this, but this is a direct experimental piece of work that compares pre and post with a group who have blueberries and a group who don't, and they don't know if they're having the blueberries or not. So it's double-blind trial. So that's diet. There is increasing evidence that diet has a very strong relationship with well-being. Activation, activity and well-being. So we know from the adult literature again that physical activity is associating with better physical and mental well-being and lower symptoms. There's evidence increasingly that offering physical activity as a treatment can reduce depression, can improve depression, can make people feel better. And if we do less and we are decreasingly active, we get less and less active, that can also be a precursor for ongoing mental health problems. So we know that schools have a role to play in helping children lead active lives. It's on the curriculum. You know, this is a fundamental pillar of good well-being and good mental health. We also use activity in therapy, and this is just a quick slide I'm showing you from Laura's work, Laura who was up here earlier. In our treatment of depression in brief behavioural activation, what we see in children who are depressed is they do less and less and less. They withdraw, they don't stay in contact with their friends, they don't do the things they used to do for fun. They still go to school, sure, they still just about get by with their homework, but they don't do the things they chose to do before, the enjoyable things, the things that gave them a buzz, the things that make them feel good, the things that gave them joy. And we see this vicious cycle, the pink circles here, that children get less out of life. That makes them feel bad, they do less, which makes them feel worse, basically, because they continue to get less out of life. So in brief behavioural activation, what we try and do is actually reactivate them, to get them to do more. It's called behavioural activation. We get them to do more of what matters, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. That makes them feel better, they get more out of life, and they get back into a virtuous circle. So activity is not just important as a general population thing. Activity is a really important element of treatment for depression. Activity makes you feel better. Purposeful activity makes you feel even better, which is where my fourth pillar comes from. What matters to you? How do we give children a sense of purpose? Who am I? What is the point of it all? Where am I going with my life? All of these things, I don't know if many of you remember being 15, but when I was 15, I remember sitting with my mates in a darkened room, listening to Pink Floyd, asking ourselves these questions. And we could do it for years, probably. I'm probably still doing it now, and I don't think they're bad questions to ask forever, actually. And if you're a child of 14, 15, 16, 17, sometimes these will come up on their own as questions. Your friends may raise it. If they don't, and an adult asks you what's important to you, that's a really big, important question. If you haven't thought about what's important to you, what we find is that children are amazed and delighted that somebody's taken the trouble to ask them, what is the purpose of your being here? Why do you want to be here? What are you going to do with it all? Having purpose has a highly energising impact. So if you do purposeful activity, that's much more helpful than just being busy, just being active. Being active alone is not important. We give children some prompts on what's important to them in these categories, things to do with yourself, hobbies, fun, your physical health, looking after yourself, keeping well. So that fits, again, with being physically active. The things that matter, we ask them to consider, is it important to you to do well at school? Don't just assume it's important because everybody else tells you it's important. This is about owning it. This is about deciding what matters to you, and it might not be the same thing that matters to your parents or your teachers or your friends. The everyday stuff, what I actually have to do just to get through, washing my clothes, ironing, getting my bags ready for school, the bigger picture, religious things, environmental things, political things. These are generally things that begin to start being interesting to teenagers. And then the people that matter, friends, families, boyfriends, anybody else. And what's really interesting, the things that they find the easiest to come up with are the relationships. Mick was right, it's always about the relationships. The people that matter, the friends, the families, all of those things are the things they can spontaneously, most easily come up with. And it's interesting, that's true if you're depressed or not depressed, and we have to steer them away from just thinking about other people and actually think more about themselves and more about the things that matter to them and not to other people. It's really great that they focus on relationships, but we don't want people to focus on relationships to the extent that they stop to thinking about themselves. So this is values, this is how we present it. It's not just doing more, it's doing more of what is important to you. We give kids in therapy examples of kids who, that you might be able to relate to, boys and girls. So we often, the bottom example here of Ellie is a very typical one we see in the clinic. Children who do a lot, but as I said, none of it is fun. They're just keeping up with the grind. They're just getting by, but they've lost the joy. So with Ellie, we wouldn't be trying to get her to do a lot more. We'd be trying to get her to do more of what she enjoyed, more of what she valued, more of what was purposeful and meaningful for her. So how can schools help? We're asked to give you some kind of takeaway messages. I don't think it's a bit early in the day for a takeaway message, so these are just some thoughts to really get us thinking about. I think we hear a lot about the whole school approach, and I really do think that is important. We need to create communities in which people can talk, they can exchange, where stigma is not the big thing it used to be. And I think there's been a huge amount of progress in this direction. I mean, just having everybody here today, having, the Vice-Chancellor who was a headmaster himself introduce the day, people who get it, it's just brilliant. This is a great opportunity for us. But this kind of work does need leadership, and it's not possible for a teacher on their own to change a school. This is about the whole leadership team taking responsibility for this and leading it right from the start. We have to promote teacher wellbeing. I think the other thing David said earlier was very interesting. You know, we're putting a hell of a lot on teachers. Teachers can't do everything. It's not reasonable, it's not fair, which is why I think it's important to think about things you can do in schools, the wellbeing stuff that can already be done and can be promoted. We shouldn't be asking teachers to take on completely new roles. It's mad. You shouldn't be replacing the NHS if it's broken. That's not, to me, that doesn't make sense. But I think we can be thinking about healthy habits and how we integrate them into core school activities. This is about building well-being, starting as we mean to go on, getting things ingrained early. All of the things we've talked about, diet, exercise, sleep, they're all about building routines. That's very good for developing your frontal lobes and getting your executive functioning. So in the curriculum, how do we ingrain healthy habits? In the non-curriculum activities, how do we ingrain healthy habits? What can schools do to support children, finding out what their values are, what their purpose is? We have school libraries. There are books on prescription to make available to children. That's a scheme. All those books can be available free. It's all online, and not everybody would want them, but some may. We need to make it easy to ask for help. What's the worst thing to say to a young person who's in distress? You'll hear this a lot. You already heard it earlier from you. Nothing. Saying nothing. That's the worst thing you can say. Say nothing. Just ignore it. It'll go away. It won't go away. We need to learn to listen and to hear. And of course, we need access. We need access to formal professional services. That's the tip of the iceberg. Schools' work is in the healthy habits, in the well-being. I don't think we'll discuss this later. I don't think it should be about providing specialist support. Individual teachers, it's all about relationships, mix right, with students, between home and school, between parents and school. We've got to get the relationships right. We have to learn how to recognise problems. We need to reward the things we want to see more of, and we need to reinforce the healthy habits that we want. And teachers are role models. They have to look after themselves as well as others. We show this to parents. You've seen it before on the plane. You have to help yourself before you help others. So that's the parent. Just a quick word to say, yes, it's a seller's market. Buyers have to beware if they're buying in services. Don't be afraid to ask for evidence. Don't be shy of pressing. If you're going to pay good money for something, you want to make sure it works. Ask them what data they collect. Ask them what improvements they see in symptoms, in functioning, in how satisfied people are when they use the services. This is routine data. People should be able to answer these questions for you. And how do they evaluate what they're doing? What have they changed as a result of their evaluation? It's easy to evaluate things, but if you don't use it, it's pointless. What did you change as a result of measuring the service that you provide? Now, there's lots of resources all out in the hall. Quick shout out to the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust. They've got a stand there. They provide amazing resources. Free to schools, to parents, to children. Mental health. Andre's in the room here too. He's got online great stuff. In the last few weeks, we've had new ways to treat child anxiety, cyberbullying on adolescents, mental health apps for children, suicide, physical activity, mindfulness in schools. Go look at the mental health online. And a whole host of e-learning. We'll talk about these later. And self-help books, just a quick plug. So, just to finish, it's all about development, it's all about change. Start as we need to go on. You can promote the healthy habits and well-being at the same time. So, many thanks. Maybe not the happiest time of your life, but we can make it a hell of a lot better. So, thank you, and that's my email address. Do follow us on Twitter if you've got any questions, and I'm here all day. So.